What happens when a single cruel joke at a family BBQ leads to the end of a marriage? How can a husband, publicly humiliated and dismissed by his wife, quietly and lawfully dismantle the life they built together? The night I laughed at him in front of everyone, I thought I'd won, until the legal papers landed on my kitchen table. The afternoon sun blazed over Judith Vole's perfectly manicured backyard, casting long shadows across the wooden deck where our family had gathered for what I thought would be just another boring Sunday BBQ. I should have known better. I should have kept my mouth shut. But when I saw Bram standing there by the grill, quietly flipping burgers with that same passive expression he always wore, something inside me snapped. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced loudly, raising my wine glass toward the assembled family members, "I'd like to propose a toast to my husband Bram, the man who's mastered the art of disappointing me in every possible way." The conversations around the patio tables died instantly. My mother-in-law Judith froze with a potato salad spoon halfway to her mouth. Bram's sister Mara stopped mid-sentence in her conversation with my mother Gloria. Even 7-year-old Ivy looked up from her coloring book with wide, confused eyes. But I was just getting started. The wine had loosened my tongue, and months of frustration with Bram's quiet, methodical nature came pouring out. "Seriously, though," I continued, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent backyard, "this man right here has perfected the art of being mediocre. Can't fix a leaky faucet without calling a plumber. Can't plan a romantic date without consulting Google, and don't even get me started on our bedroom situation." "Lysandra," Bram said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sizzling grill. "Maybe we should—" "Oh, no, honey," I interrupted, turning to face him directly. "Let's not pretend everything's fine. Let's talk about how you'd never get me pregnant again, even if we tried for a decade. Hell, I'm surprised we managed to have Ivy at all." The silence that followed was deafening. Judith's face had gone completely white, her hands trembling as she set down her plate. Mara was staring at me with unconcealed disgust. Even my own mother looked uncomfortable, though she tried to force a laugh. "It's just her way," Gloria said weakly, attempting to break the tension. "You know how Lysandra gets when she's had a glass of wine." But nobody was buying it. I could see the hurt in Bram's eyes as he turned back to the grill, his shoulders rigid with humiliation. Good, I thought. Maybe now he'd understand how it felt to be ignored and taken for granted. That's when I noticed Colby Harker, Bram's former engineering colleague, who now worked in my HR department, standing near the beverage table. He caught my eye and gave me a subtle wink, his lips curving into an appreciative smile. At least someone understood me. At least someone appreciated my honesty. "You know what?" I said, emboldened by Colby's attention. "Maybe if my husband paid half as much attention to me as he does to his precious blueprints and construction schedules, we wouldn't have these problems. But no, I married a man who thinks romance means remembering to put the toilet seat down." Bram carefully set down his grilling tongs and turned to face me. For a moment, I thought he might finally stand up for himself, might finally show some backbone. Instead, he looked at me with those steady brown eyes and said, "I think it's time for us to go home." "Oh, running away again?" I laughed, but the sound came out harsh and bitter. How typical. The moment things get real, Bram Vole disappears into his little shell. That's when Ivy started crying, quiet, confused sobs that cut through my wine-induced confidence like a knife. Suddenly, I realized that everyone was staring at me, not with admiration or understanding, but with something that looked suspiciously like disgust. Bram walked over to our daughter and knelt down beside her chair. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice gentle and reassuring. "Mummy's just having a bad day. Why don't we go home and watch that movie you wanted to see?" As he helped Ivy gather her coloring supplies, I found myself standing alone in the middle of the patio, my wine glass still raised in a toast that nobody had joined. The party had effectively ended with my outburst, and family members were already starting to clean up and make their excuses to leave. "Well," I said, trying to salvage some dignity, "I guess the truth hurts, doesn't it?" But nobody responded. Judith was already carrying dishes into the house, her movements sharp and angry. Mara was helping Ivy into the car, pointedly avoiding eye contact with me. Even Colby had disappeared, probably realizing that being associated with my scene wasn't good for his reputation. The drive home was silent except for Ivy's occasional sniffles from the back seat. Bram's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. I wanted to say something, to explain that I'd only been joking around, but the words wouldn't come. When we pulled into our driveway, Bram helped Ivy out of the car and walked her to the front door without saying a word to me. I followed behind, suddenly feeling very sober and very alone. That night, after Ivy had gone to bed, I tried to approach Bram in his study. He was sitting at his desk, staring at his laptop screen, with an intensity that seemed forced. The room smelled like his cologne and old books, familiar scents that usually comforted me but now felt oppressive. "Bram," I said, leaning against the doorframe, "we need to talk about what happened today." He didn't look up from his screen. "Do we? Come on, you know I was just blowing off steam. You can't tell me you're actually upset about a few harmless jokes." Finally, he turned to face me. His expression was unreadable, which somehow made it worse than if he'd been angry. "Harmless jokes," he repeated slowly. "Is that what you call humiliating me in front of my family?" "Oh, please," I said, stepping into the room. "Don't be so dramatic. Everyone knows I have a big mouth when I drink. It's not like I said anything that wasn't true." "You told my mother that I'm a disappointment. You announced to everyone that our marriage is a failure. You made our daughter cry." His voice remained calm, but I could hear the steel underneath. "Which part of that was harmless?" I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. Probably Colby texting me. We'd been exchanging messages for weeks now. Nothing serious. Just friendly conversation that had gradually become more flirtatious. He understood me in ways that Bram never had. He made me feel attractive and interesting, not like the boring suburban housewife I'd become. "Look," I said, trying a different approach, "I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings, but you have to understand where I'm coming from. We barely talk anymore. We haven't been intimate in months, and sometimes I feel like I'm living with a stranger. What am I supposed to do with all that frustration? Maybe try talking to me instead of broadcasting our problems to the entire family. I've tried talking to you, but you're always working or tired or distracted. When was the last time you planned a date night? When was the last time you surprised me with anything? You've gotten so comfortable in this marriage that you've stopped trying." Bram closed his laptop and turned his chair to face me fully. "So this is my fault." "I didn't say that. You just said I've stopped trying. You said I'm the reason you feel frustrated. How is that not blaming me?" My phone buzzed again. This time I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Colby had sent a photo of himself at some trendy downtown bar, looking relaxed and happy. The message read, "Wish you were here to keep me company." "Are you seriously checking your phone right now?" Bram asked. "It's just work stuff," I lied, quickly putting the phone away. "Look, can we just forget about today and move on?" I said I was sorry. "No, Lysandra, I don't think we can just move on, not this time." Something in his tone made me nervous. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm tired of being your punching bag. I'm tired of being blamed for every problem in your life. And I'm especially tired of being humiliated in public while you act like it's my fault for being sensitive. You are being overly sensitive. God, Bram, when did you become such a victim? The man I married had a sense of humor. He could take a joke without turning it into some big relationship crisis. The woman I married wouldn't have needed to tear me down to make herself feel better." The words hit harder than I'd expected. For a moment, I almost apologized genuinely. Almost. But then my phone buzzed a third time, and I thought about Colby waiting for my response. And suddenly, I felt angry again. You know what? Maybe if you paid half as much attention to me as you do to feeling sorry for yourself, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Bram stared at me for a long moment, then picked up his phone and started scrolling through something. "I think you should sleep in the guest room tonight." "Excuse me?" I need some space to think, and honestly, I don't want to share a bed with someone who thinks so little of me. Fine, I snapped, but don't expect me to come crawling back when you realize you're being ridiculous. I stormed out of the study and went to the guest room, where I spent the next hour texting with Colby. He was sympathetic and understanding, telling me that I deserved better than a man who couldn't appreciate my honesty. By the time I fell asleep, I was already planning to meet him for lunch the next day. What I didn't know was that Bram had spent that same hour creating a new folder on his computer labeled documentation and beginning a careful record of our conversation. He'd also changed the passwords on our joint accounts and started researching divorce attorneys. The next morning, Ivy asked me why Daddy looked so sad. I told her that grown-ups sometimes had disagreements, but that everything would be fine. Even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The following Monday, I found myself counting the minutes until lunch. Colby had suggested we meet at that new Italian place downtown, somewhere we were unlikely to run into anyone from the office. As I sat across from him in the dimly lit restaurant, I felt more alive than I had in months. "You look beautiful," he said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Marriage stress suits you." I laughed, feeling a flutter of excitement in my stomach. "Is that your way of saying I look tired?" "Not tired, determined, like you're finally ready to stop settling for less than you deserve." We talked for over an hour about everything and nothing. Colby told me about his weekend hiking trip, his plans to buy a motorcycle, his dreams of traveling to Europe. He made me remember what it felt like to be interesting, to be desired. When he walked me back to the office building, he squeezed my hand and said, "We should do this more often." Back at my desk, I found myself smiling as I worked through the afternoon's HR paperwork. When my colleague Jennifer asked what had me in such a good mood, I found myself saying, "Just enjoying life again, you know. Sometimes you have to remind yourself that you're still young and attractive." "Trouble at home?" Jennifer asked, raising an eyebrow. "Let's just say some people get too comfortable in marriage and forget they need to keep earning their partner's attention." Word travels fast in an office environment. By the end of the week, half the HR department knew that Lysandra was having issues with her husband. I didn't mind. If anything, I enjoyed the sympathy and attention. Several of my female colleagues shared their own marriage horror stories, and I felt validated in my frustration. At home, things continued to deteriorate. Bram had become even more withdrawn, speaking to me only when necessary and spending most of his evenings either working late or locked in his study. When I tried to engage him in conversation, he gave me polite but distant responses that made me feel like I was talking to a stranger. "Daddy's being weird," Ivy told me one evening as I helped her with her homework. "He keeps asking me about school and my friends, but like he's taking notes or something." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Like yesterday, he asked me if I remembered what happened at Grandma's BBQ, and when I said it made me sad, he wrote something down in a little notebook." A chill ran down my spine, but I forced myself to smile. "Daddy's just trying to be a better listener. That's a good thing, right?" That night, I confronted Bram about it. "Ivy says you're taking notes about our conversations. What's that about?" "I'm just trying to keep track of things," he said, without looking up from his laptop. "What kind of things?" "Important things. Things I might forget." "That's not an answer, Bram." Finally, he looked at me. "Maybe you should ask yourself why the idea of me paying attention bothers you so much." The next day, Colby and I met for coffee before work. He seemed distracted, less flirtatious than usual. When I asked him what was wrong, he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Look, Lysandra, I've been thinking about this thing between us. Maybe we should cool it down a little." My stomach dropped. "What? Why?" "It's just, people are starting to talk. And I heard through the grapevine that your husband works for Morrison and Associates. That's a pretty connected firm in this city. I can't afford to get a reputation as the guy who breaks up marriages." "We're not breaking up anything. We're just friends having lunch. Are we? Because the way you've been talking about him to our co-workers, it sounds like you're building a case for why your marriage should end. I stared at him, feeling exposed and defensive. I'm just being honest about my situation. Yeah, well, maybe be honest with your husband instead of with me. I'm not looking to be anyone's exit strategy. He left me sitting alone at the coffee shop, and I spent the rest of the morning feeling humiliated and angry. When I got home that evening, I found Bram in the kitchen making dinner for himself and Ivy. He'd stopped cooking for me weeks ago, claiming he wasn't sure when I'd be home. We need to talk, I said. After Ivy goes to bed, he replied without turning around. But when bedtime came, Bram announced that he had a conference call with a client and disappeared into his study. I could hear him talking in low, professional tones for over an hour. When he finally emerged, I was waiting for him in the hallway. Busy night? I asked sarcastically. Yes, actually. Some of us still care about our professional reputations. The comment felt like a slap. What's that supposed to mean? It means maybe you should think twice before telling half your office that your husband is a disappointment. Word gets around, Lysandra. This is a smaller professional community than you think. My heart started racing. Who told you that? Does it matter? The point is that you're so busy complaining about me to anyone who'll listen that you've forgotten we're supposed to be on the same team. We stopped being on the same team the day you decided to shut me out instead of working on our problems. I shut you out? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You humiliated me in front of my family. You've been telling your co-workers that I'm a failure as a husband, and now you're angry that I'm not more open with you. Do you hear yourself? I wanted to argue, but something in his expression stopped me. There was a hardness there that I'd never seen before, a finality that scared me more than his anger would have. Bram, I said, my voice softer now, I think we should consider marriage counseling. I think it's too late for that. He walked past me toward the bedroom, leaving me standing alone in the hallway with the distinct feeling that I'd just lost something important without fully understanding what it was. 2 weeks later, I discovered that our joint checking account had been nearly emptied. When I called the bank, they informed me that Bram had transferred most of our shared funds into a separate account that required both signatures for access. I was furious. What the hell do you think you're doing? I confronted him that evening, waving the bank statement in his face. Protecting our assets, he said calmly, not looking up from the legal document he was reading at the kitchen table. Protecting them from what? From me? From impulsive decisions made during an emotional time. You can't just steal our money. I didn't steal anything. The funds are still there. They just require both of our consent to access. I thought that seemed fair, given the circumstances. I stared at him, hardly recognizing the man I'd married. The passive, accommodating Bram I knew had been replaced by someone calculating and methodical. What circumstances? The circumstances where my wife publicly humiliates me, spreads rumors about our marriage at her workplace, and then gets angry when I don't trust her judgment. I never spread rumors. He reached into a folder beside him and pulled out several printed pages. Jennifer Morrison from your HR department called my office last week. Apparently, her husband works with me on the Riverside project. She wanted to check in because she'd heard I was going through a difficult time with my demanding wife. My face burned with embarrassment. That's not what I said to her. No. What about telling Sarah Chen that some husbands get lazy and stop appreciating what they have? Or mentioning to the entire break room that you were re-evaluating your life choices? How do you know all this? Because people talk, Lysandra. Because when you trash your husband to your co-workers, some of those co-workers have connections to his professional world. Because you've made our private business public, and now I have to deal with the consequences. I sank into a chair across from him, suddenly feeling very small. I was just venting. Everyone complains about their spouses sometimes. Do they? Do they really announce at family gatherings that their husband is sexually inadequate? Do they tell their colleagues that their marriage is a mistake? Because that's not normal venting, Lysandra. That's character assassination. You're being dramatic. Am I? He pulled out his phone and showed me a text message. This is from my sister. She wants to know if Ivy and I need a place to stay because she's worried about the toxic environment at home. This is from my mother, asking if I need help finding a good divorce attorney. This is from your own mother, telling me I need to be more understanding of your emotional needs during this rough patch. I read the messages with growing horror. I never asked them to get involved. No, but your behavior did. When you make our problems public, you force other people to take sides. And right now, most of them are choosing mine. The truth of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Over the past month, I'd noticed that Judith had stopped calling me directly, routing all communication through Bram. Mara had cancelled our usual shopping plans twice, claiming work conflicts. Even some of my own friends seemed distant when I tried to make social plans. This is ridiculous, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. We're having a rough patch, that's all. Every marriage goes through them. Is that what this is? A rough patch? He gestured to the legal documents on the table. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my wife has checked out of our marriage and is building a case for why that's my fault. I glanced at the papers he'd been reading. The letterhead read, Patterson Family Law. My blood ran cold. You're talking to divorce lawyers? I'm exploring my options. Without discussing it with me first. When exactly was I supposed to discuss it with you? Between your lunch dates with Colby and your character assassination sessions at work. The mention of Colby made my stomach drop. How do you know about Colby? The same way I know about everything else. People talk, restaurants have security cameras, credit card statements show patterns. He leaned back in his chair, studying my face. Did you really think I wouldn't notice that you've been meeting another man for lunch twice a week? We're just friends. He's someone who actually listens to me and treats me like I matter. Right, and I'm sure your friendship has nothing to do with the fact that you've been telling anyone who'll listen that your husband is inadequate. I wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was that my relationship with Colby had given me something to look forward to, something that made me feel valued and attractive. But looking at Bram now, seeing the hurt and determination in his eyes, I realized how it must have appeared from the outside. It's not what you think, I said weakly. What I think is that my wife has decided our marriage is over and is too much of a coward to say so directly. What I think is that instead of working on our problems, you've chosen to seek validation elsewhere and blame me for driving you to it. That's not fair. Fair. He laughed bitterly. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been coming to me when you felt neglected instead of announcing to my family that I'm a failure as a man. Fair would have been suggesting counselling before you started having emotional affairs with my former colleagues. Fair would have been treating me with basic respect instead of using me as your personal punching bag. I sat there in silence, unable to argue with anything he'd said. The worst part was that some small part of me knew he was right. I had been looking for reasons to justify my growing attraction to Colby. I had been building a narrative where Bram was the villain and I was the victim. But faced with his calm recitation of facts, that narrative started to crumble. So what happens now? I asked quietly. Now we figure out how to end this marriage with as little damage to Ivy as possible. End it. Just like that. Don't I get a say in this? You've been saying it for months, Lysandra. With every public humiliation, every lunch date, every conversation where you've painted me as the reason for your unhappiness. I'm just finally listening. That night, I called my mother and told her everything. She listened sympathetically and assured me that Bram was overreacting, that all marriages went through difficult periods, that men were naturally more sensitive about these things. But even as she spoke, I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Maybe you should try to work things out, she said finally, for Ivy's sake. I've been trying, but he's already made up his mind. He's talking to lawyers, Mom. He's treating me like I'm some kind of criminal. Well, honey, You did say some pretty harsh things at that BBQ, and this thing with your coworker. Nothing happened with Colby. We're just friends. I know, sweetheart, but sometimes the appearance of something is just as damaging as the reality. After I hung up, I sat alone in the guest room where I'd been sleeping for weeks, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. But deep down, I knew it hadn't been quick at all. It had been building for months, maybe years, and I'd been too focused on my own needs to notice the damage I was causing. The next morning, I decided to take control of the situation. If Bram wanted to play hardball, I could play too. I called in sick to work and spent the morning researching divorce laws and custody arrangements. If he thought he could just steamroll me with his careful documentation and legal preparations, he was wrong. I also sent Colby a text asking him to meet me for coffee. I needed to know where I stood with him, whether there was a real future there, or if I was just fooling myself. His response was immediate but disappointing. Can't do lunch anymore. Office situation got complicated. When I pressed him for details, he called me instead of texting back. Look, Lysandra, I heard your husband's been making inquiries about me. Professional inquiries. My boss pulled me aside yesterday and asked about my relationship with you. What did you tell him? I told him we were just friends, but he made it clear that even the appearance of impropriety could affect my career prospects. I can't afford that right now. So you're just abandoning me. I'm protecting myself, which is what you should have been doing instead of burning bridges with your husband. I thought you cared about me. I do care about you, but not enough to risk my professional reputation. I'm sorry, but we need to stop seeing each other. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me feeling more alone than ever. The man I'd thought was my escape route had just revealed himself to be as self-serving as everyone else. That afternoon, I picked Ivy up from school and took her for ice cream, hoping to spend some quality time together and maybe gather some information about Bram's recent behavior. Has Daddy been asking you a lot of questions lately? I asked as she worked on her chocolate sundae. Sort of. He wants to know about school and my friends and if I'm happy at home. What do you tell him? I tell him I'm happy, but I wish you and Daddy didn't fight so much. It makes me scared. Guilt washed over me as I looked at my daughter's serious little face. We're not fighting, sweetie. We're just working through some grown-up problems. Are you going to get divorced like Emma's parents? The question caught me off guard. Why would you ask that? Because Emma said her parents used to sleep in different rooms before they got divorced. And you and Daddy sleep in different rooms now. I didn't know how to respond to that. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that her mother had systematically destroyed her marriage through selfishness and poor judgment? Sometimes grown-ups need space to think about things, I said finally. But no matter what happens between Daddy and me, we both love you very much. When we got home, Bram was waiting in the kitchen with a manila envelope in his hands. His expression was grimmer than usual, and I felt a knot of anxiety form in my stomach. Ivy, why don't you go play in your room for a while? He said gently. Mommy and I need to have a talk. After Ivy disappeared upstairs, Bram handed me the envelope. You need to look at this. Inside were printed copies of text messages between Colby and me. Bank statements showing my credit card purchases at restaurants during work hours, and a timeline of events starting with the BBQ incident. Everything was documented with dates, times, and supporting evidence. How did you get my text messages? They're backed up to our shared cloud account, the account you forgot to remove me from when you changed your phone password. I felt sick as I read through the messages, seeing how flirtatious and inappropriate they looked when viewed together. There was nothing explicitly sexual, but the emotional intimacy was undeniable. This doesn't prove anything, I said, but my voice was shaking. It proves that while I was trying to save our marriage, you were building a relationship with another man. It proves that you've been lying to me for weeks. And it proves that you've been using our marital problems as justification for emotional infidelity. You're twisting everything, Colby was just a friend who listened to me when you wouldn't. A friend you met secretly. A friend you complained to about your inadequate husband. A friend you were clearly developing feelings for while telling me that I was the problem in our marriage. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the weight of evidence against me. What do you want from me, Bram? What will it take to fix this? I don't think it can be fixed. I think we're too far past the point of no return. So that's it? You're just giving up on us? I'm not giving up, Lysandra. I'm accepting reality. You checked out of this marriage months ago. You've been looking for reasons to justify leaving, and now you have them. The only difference is that I'm not going to let you rewrite history to make me the villain. I never wanted to leave. I just wanted you to pay attention to me, to make an effort. By humiliating me in public, by having an emotional affair, by telling everyone who'd listen that I'm a failure as a husband. I had no answer for that because we both knew he was right. I had done all those things, and I justified them by telling myself that he'd driven me to it. I'm going to file for divorce next week, he said quietly. I'm going to ask for joint custody of Ivy, with primary residence determined by what's best for her stability and well-being. I'm going to divide our assets fairly, and I'm going to request that we both attend co-parenting classes to learn how to minimize the impact on our daughter. You've got it all figured out, don't you? I've had weeks to think about it while you were having lunch dates with Colby. And what if I fight you? What if I contest the divorce? Then this folder goes to my attorney, and we let a judge decide who's been acting in the best interests of our family. I stared at him, finally understanding that the quiet, passive man I'd married had been replaced by someone who would not be manipulated or bullied, someone who had documented everything and prepared for every possible outcome. You really hate me, don't you? No, Lysandra, I don't hate you, but I don't trust you, I don't respect you, and I can't live with someone who treats me the way you've been treating me. Our marriage is over. The only question now is whether we end it with dignity, or if you want to make it uglier than it already is. That evening, after Bram had gone to his study and Ivy was asleep, I sat alone in the living room, trying to process everything that had happened. My marriage was ending, my affair partner had abandoned me, and I was facing the possibility of losing primary custody of my daughter. For the first time in months, I tried to see the situation from Bram's perspective. I tried to imagine how I would have felt if he had humiliated me at a family gathering, if he had been meeting another woman for secret lunches, if he had been telling his co-workers that I was inadequate as a wife. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had been the villain in this story all along. The following Monday, I came home from work to find Bram waiting in the kitchen with his mother Judith and his sister Mara. On the table in front of them was a stack of legal documents that made my heart sink. "What's this?" I asked, though I already knew. "Divorce papers," Bram said simply, "and a custody agreement proposal." Judith looked at me with undisguised contempt. "I never thought I'd see the day when someone would treat my son the way you've treated him." "This is between Bram and me," I said, trying to maintain some dignity. "It doesn't concern you." "It concerns all of us," Mara interjected. "Ivy is our family too, and we're not going to stand by while you destroy her sense of security because you couldn't keep your marriage vows." "I never broke my marriage vows. Didn't you?" Bram pulled out his phone and began reading from it. Text to Colby Harker, March 15th. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I'd married someone who actually appreciated me." March 22nd. "I wish I could start over with someone who understands what I need." March 28th. "Maybe some people are just meant to be together, even if the timing isn't right." I felt my face burn with shame as he continued reading messages that sounded damning when taken out of context, or maybe they sounded damning because they were damning. Those were I was just frustrated. I wasn't planning to leave you for him. No, you were just keeping him as a backup plan while you systematically destroyed our marriage from the inside. "Where's Ivy?" I asked, suddenly realizing our daughter wasn't anywhere to be seen. She's at my house, Judith said firmly. She's going to stay there tonight while you three work this out. A child shouldn't have to witness her parents' marriage falling apart. You can't just take my daughter. I didn't take her, Bram said. I asked my mother to watch her while we handled this legal business. She'll be home tomorrow after school, assuming you can behave like a civilized adult. I looked at the divorce papers, feeling overwhelmed by the legal language and formal terminology. I need time to read through all this. I need to get my own lawyer. That's your right, Bram said, but I want you to understand something before you decide how to proceed. Everything I'm asking for is reasonable and fair. I'm not trying to punish you or take Ivy away from you. I'm just trying to end our marriage with as little additional damage as possible. Additional damage? Mara laughed bitterly. You've already humiliated him publicly, destroyed his reputation in your workplace, and had an emotional affair with his former colleague. How much more damage were you planning to do? It wasn't an affair. We never even kissed. Emotional infidelity is still infidelity, Judith said coldly. And the fact that you don't understand that tells me everything I need to know about your character. I felt ganged up on, attacked from all sides by people who had already decided I was the villain. This isn't fair. You're all acting like I'm some kind of monster, but I'm not the only one with problems in this marriage. You're right, Bram said quietly. I wasn't perfect either. I probably did get too comfortable, too complacent. I probably didn't show you enough attention or appreciation. But instead of talking to me about it, you chose to punish me for it. Instead of working on our problems, you chose to seek validation elsewhere and blame me for driving you to it. I tried to talk to you. When? When did you try to have a calm, honest conversation about our marriage problems? Because what I remember is being criticized, mocked, and humiliated. What I remember is coming home every day wondering what I'd done wrong now. I wanted to argue, but the truth was that he was right. I had been critical and mocking. I had made him feel like he couldn't do anything right. I had turned our home into a place where he felt unwelcome and unappreciated. So what happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Now you decide whether you want to sign these papers and end our marriage amicably, or whether you want to fight it and make everything public in court. What do you mean, make everything public? Bram gestured to a thick folder on the counter. I mean that if you contest this divorce or try to claim that I'm an unfit father, I'll present evidence of your emotional affair, your public humiliation of me, and your pattern of manipulative behavior. I'll call witnesses who can testify about your conduct at family gatherings and your inappropriate relationship with Colby. I'll make sure the judge understands exactly why this marriage failed. The threat was delivered calmly, almost casually, but it hit me like a sledgehammer. Everything I'd done, every cruel comment and secret meeting, would be laid out in open court for everyone to see. You're blackmailing me. I'm giving you a choice. Sign the papers and accept a fair custody arrangement, or fight me and risk losing much more than you're comfortable losing. I looked around the room at the three faces staring back at me. Judith's expression was stern and unforgiving. Mara looked disgusted. And Bram looked tired but determined, like a man who had finally found his backbone after years of being pushed around. I need time to think about this. You have until Friday, Bram said. After that, I file regardless of whether you've signed or not. That night, I called my mother and told her about the ultimatum. She listened quietly as I explained the situation, occasionally making sympathetic noises, but not offering much in the way of practical advice. Maybe you should just sign the papers, she said finally. If he's being fair about custody and money, it might be better to just get it over with. I can't believe you're taking his side, too. I'm not taking sides, honey. I'm just being realistic. You made some mistakes, and now you have to deal with the consequences. Fighting him in court will just make everything worse for everyone, especially Ivy. The next few days passed in a blur of consultations with lawyers, tearful conversations with Ivy, and sleepless nights spent replaying every moment that had led to this point. Every attorney I spoke with told me the same thing. Bram's proposal was fair, and fighting it would likely result in a worse outcome for me. On Thursday night, I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen with the divorce papers spread out in front of me. Bram had gone to pick up Ivy from his mother's house, and the silence in the house felt oppressive. When they returned, Ivy ran to me and threw her arms around my waist. "Mommy, I missed you." "I missed you too, baby," I said, holding her tight and fighting back tears. "Grandma Judith says you and Daddy are getting divorced. Is that true?" I looked over her head at Bram, who was standing in the doorway watching us. His expression was sad but resolute. "Yes, sweetheart, it's true, but that doesn't mean we love you any less. Will I still get to see both of you?" "Of course," Bram said, coming over to join our hug. "We'll work out a schedule so you can spend time with both Mommy and Daddy. The most important thing is that you know this isn't your fault, and we both love you very much." After we put Ivy to bed, I handed Bram the signed divorce papers. "I hope you're happy," I said bitterly. "I'm not happy, Lysandra. I'm relieved. There's a difference." "You've destroyed our family." "No," he said quietly. "We destroyed our family. The difference is that I'm trying to salvage what's left of it while you're still looking for someone else to blame." As I watched him walk away, I realized that the quiet, passive man I'd married had never been weak at all. He'd been patient. He'd been giving me chances to be better, to treat him with respect, to value what we had together. And I'd mistaken his patience for weakness right up until the moment he decided he'd had enough. 6 months later, our divorce was finalized. Bram got the house, I got a small apartment across town, and Ivy split her time between us, according to a carefully crafted custody agreement. Colby had transferred to another company after his supervisor made it clear that his friendship with me had damaged his professional reputation. My own career had stagnated as word of my behavior spread through the office. But the worst part wasn't the financial consequences or the professional embarrassment. The worst part was the look in Ivy's eyes when she asked me why I had said those mean things about Daddy at the BBQ. The worst part was realizing that I had taught my daughter that love meant tearing down the people closest to you when they disappointed you. As I sat in my empty apartment on what would have been our 10th wedding anniversary, I finally understood what I had lost. I had lost a man who had loved me enough to endure years of criticism and contempt. I had lost a partner who had been willing to work on our problems if I had just been willing to work with him instead of against him. I had lost a family because I had been too selfish and too proud to appreciate what I had until it was gone. The night I humiliated Bram at that BBQ, I thought I was finally standing up for myself. Instead, I was destroying the best thing in my life with my own hands. And by the time I realized what I had done, it was too late to take any of it back.